Sort of like what Mike said yesterday, it's great to see people popping back in and seeing the cameras either stay on or popping off. So however that looks, it's great to still have you here. What we're going to do is we're going to have our report back from our breakout rooms, and we're going to run it quite similarly to how we did it yesterday. One thing that we know is that the topics discussed today were quite robust, as they were yesterday, speaking about sediment and turbidity, the assessment of wildfire exposure, the Ashland case study, water quantity, et cetera. And we know that your conversations were probably, hopefully thriving as you got pulled back into the main room. What we'll do is we'll go one by one, and we're going to sort of do a round robin through the facilitators to keep them moving about. We will start with asking each facilitator to answer or introduce one concept that was discussed. Then we'll ask the facilitator at the second round to talk about their overall impressions of the conversation of the group, and then we'll have for clarifications and comments. As you all know, when we go into breakout rooms, one thing that doesn't happen is that there is no recording. There was no audio recording, nor was there a recording of the chat rooms. So anybody that is in the big room right now, if you have any clarifications or want to say anything about what you discussed, you are more than welcome to put that in these chat. We won't address them directly now, but that will be information that we have later on for the recording of this meeting overall. So we're going to start with Nori. If you can introduce one concept that was discussed or issue that was discussed in your breakout room.
One of the concepts was the idea of how valuable people thought the program in Ashland was. But yet then there was the scale of that program and now the scale of the fires. So can we get these programs up to the level, to the scale of the fires we're having now?
Thank you. Julie.
I'll just add on to that. We had a lot of discussion about the scale that these fires brought and the need to think about larger scales with modeling and data collection.
Aaron?
Hey, good afternoon. We had a really productive discussion. Had the contributions of people working for soil and water conservation districts, Department of Environmental Quality, and a city's water utility as well. I would say that one of the main topics that we talked about was historic fire across the state of Oregon, but then also types associated with infrequent burn intervals, such as the Coast Range. What was the use of fire by indigenous communities, and how different does the landscape look? That was a major topic of conversation in our group. Thank you.
Alicia.
So one of the topics that came up was how in a post-fire setting, sometimes you don't have the length of time that you normally would if you were doing a planned, management project on your land or monitoring or implementation or anything. And so in terms of restoration and salvage logging and sorts, you kind of have to quick track it, fast track it a lot more than you normally would. And you might not always have all the research available that you would normally have at your disposal either. And so it's important to, monitor throughout that process and try to obtain good data so that you understand those impacts when you don't have the planning that normally would be provided.
Great, thank you. Jacob.
At one point, that was brought up that I thought was really good was that the Labor Day fires are really going to show us what happens following a wildfire to streams and watersheds. So.
Inka?
Yeah, one of the takeaways for our group was kind of thinking that, if you're a water manager and you have a reservoir, you might not be as concerned about peak and low flows. But if you're got a stream intake, you're going to be a lot more conscious about timber harvest, and that how you're managing your watershed would be a lot different.
Dan.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, we had some good conversation here, and a few people chimed in and just really, kind of these aha moments of just how interdependent and complicated these systems really are. We had a few people really chime in on that, and people were really kind of surprised by the ownerships of some of our community water systems. And we had the pleasure of an attendant who's from another part of our country, where they are cursed with abundance of water. That was really interesting, and ownerships were very different there also. We did talk about just how some of these water quantity issues are newer, and that there's been a focus on water quality, and so folks were really interested to see where this kind of switch and newer switch and focus will maybe lead to some more interesting revelations.
Great, thank you. John.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. We had a really interesting discussion about consistency in the results, and particularly the effects of harvesting on water yields, whether it's peak flows or quantities, summer low flows. And I think that the concept that these studies are being done at different scales, in different kind of moisture regimes, precipitation regimes, in different geologies. I do think that people are starting to get an idea that there's not going to be a single consistent answer to these questions.
Excellent, thank you. And Dean.
Hi, so our group, again, was really focusing on scale, and different scales can offset those effects, or they can exacerbate the effects you're seeing in different studies, and different cereal stages and potentially offsetting harvest or early onset of harvest in one place in lieu of another could maybe offset some of these changes in low flow. And also one of the big ones is not a lot of communication between forest managers and city or urban water managers.
Great, thank you all so much. What we're going to do right now is I'm going to have three of you open your unmic, and I'm going to ask you, it will be Nori, Julie, and Aaron. And my first question is, do you have another concept do you wish to introduce, or do you want to make a clarification about anything that was said that might have also been highlighted in your group? You can go in any order you choose. Nori, Julie, and Aaron.
I would say that the context of climate change was a great uncertainty in terms of any changes in temperature, precipitation, or their extremes. And that, I think, too, needs to be looked at synergistically. Climate change coupled with land use, land cover change, and other socioecological changes taking place. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would just, we had a conversation on climate change too, and we also talked about how do we set up studies to encompass a bigger picture, looking at the lowlands, the agriculture lands, and then an example when these Labor Day fires came, how the home areas also became an area of toxic and hazardous materials and those contaminants and ash going into the stream. And so I think it goes back to maybe further discussion on scale, and that these are complex issues with many different layers, and how do we study not only all those users across time, but all those different impacts that could happen.
And I'll just add to that, we had a small woodland owner, a small landowner who wanted people to know that they wanted to do cleanup and wanted to do right, but they just didn't have a lot of the resources that the bigger companies would have too. So that was a different perspective that was brought in.
Thank you so much, all three of you. So for the next three to unmic, it will be Alicia, Jacob, and Inka. The same question, a new concept. Any clarifications or comments on anything mentioned before? Any order you wish.
One thing that was brought up was a question about how nutrient runoff from soil erosion will influence algae blooms. And then another one that I thought was interesting is how or if insurance companies in rural areas would change policies now based on the 2020 wildfires.
Going back to the water quantity conversation, one of our group members brought up that, it seems that, you need to either have longer rotations and indirectly related to stream flows, or you need to move the shorter rotations farther away from the stream in an effort to, maintain economic needs. And that this would be obviously easier on larger watersheds. And then that kind of led to a conversation about, how important it is to follow the science and act based on that. But, obviously, and talking about how, science-based policy is important, but obviously public opinion and politics tend to come into play as well. So.
And we had a good discussion surrounding the current notification process for any forest operation and how effective that currently is for entities who are affected, like wastewater treatment, adjacent landowners, et cetera. And then that kind of led into a discussion of how Senate Bill 1602 will affect this notification process and how, this might make the tracking process easier for entities who need to be in the know. So we had a good conversation surrounding notification.
Thank you three so much. For the next three, it will be Dan, John, and Dean, if you'll unmic. And in any order you wish, if you have a new concept you want to introduce or comment or clarifications of anything that's been said so far.
So we had a good discussion on just how difficult it is to isolate these separate factors, whether it's fire and water quantity, or particularly related to salvage. One of the participants in our group runs a small water district in the Coast Range, and it's very sensitive to the effects of harvest on the community and community economics there. There was concern over how this is going to relate to availability of recreation opportunities, local economics, things like that. So it's looking at these water quantity, water quality in isolation may not serve the community well.
Okay, so in my group, there was some really good discussions here. And so one of them really was just the importance of the importance of just, of these the coastal fire occurrences to around that, and just people need to be aware of that. But, so there have been some, I just lost where I was on my notes, excuse me. There's been, we have data on fire over periods of time, and recurrence of fires, and there's this long fire history to look at. But what about these single incidents or these one-time big incidents that are happening? How can we get data from those type of events that really don't fit into that, fire record perhaps? There's been a lot of recent science and around forest age data and the timing of water flows and water quality, especially in Western forests. And so I'm really curious to see where the research goes, and wondering really if there's going to be any policy change around any of that data. There was some mention too of, a need for more cost analyses, looking at treatment facilities versus the water quality in the water, and really taking into account those management activities upstream.
So for our group, I think one of the things we talked about was the real benefit and the kind of the sense of ease that we get from looking at a really long-term study that goes back a really long ways, but also a lot of issues with that, with change in land practices, change in laws, change in road densities, change in climate. It kind of negates the value of those long-term studies. So that's kind of a tension that we didn't really have very many solutions for. And then I suggested, maybe that demonstrates the long-term use for modeling, where we can plug in things that we actually know are happening, like plant physiology, water use by cereal stage, geology aspect, things like that. And we could look at our long-term studies as well as our modeling to maybe inform our decisions.
Great, thank you so much. For this last 10 minutes, we're going to ask each of you to take about a minute or so. And my question to you is either, what was the one thing that really stood out to you in your discussions, your aha moment, or was it brought some particular insights, or what was your general impression of the conversation overall? And I'm just going to randomly start calling out names. So I will start with Jacob.
And put me on the spot. In terms of our breakout session, is that what you're referring to? Well, I think my aha moment is, well, we had kind of talked about smoke and smoke management and the public perceptions of that too. So we kind of got a little off topic, but we were bouncing around, and it was interesting to hear some of the perceptions of one of the person in the breakout room. They mentioned that in the early or the mid 20th century, it was a wetter period, so there wasn't as much smoke in the Willamette Valley. And then over the last 20 or 30 years or so, we've been in a more drier period. So wildfires frequency has increased, and the Willamette Valley has increased in the amount of smoke that I guess intrudes on it over the last 20, 30 years. So I thought that kind of was interesting, and how that has changed and shaped the way folks that live in the Willamette Valley kind of view wildfire smoke. So
Great, thank you, Jacob, very much. Let's go to Julie.
Thanks, Lisa. So I think one of the things that probably is obvious about, people bring in their own experiences and how they interpret the research and how they're going to apply it to their own experiences or landscapes. And I think one of the things, people really appreciated yesterday and today, hearing the collaborations, the communications that happen out on the ground, and how can we maybe set up research that would gain more trust across wider audiences and diversity if we look at those collaborative type models of what we're, asking to happen out on the ground. And so just thinking in that, a lot of times there was skepticism, or people took certain things they wanted to talk about, or, realizing it certain research didn't apply across, is just thinking in the future, how do we help gain more of that trust, and looking at some of those collaborative models like Ashland and the case study to apply that to research.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Nori.
I think it was my kind of aha, or how my perception was people kind of looking at coming to a new understanding of the sense of scale, the kind of risk, and the partnerships that are possible, and sort of the sense of retooling to a new perspective of how to approach the problem with that new understanding of the scale, the partnerships, and the risk.
Thank you. John.
Well, I think we got into some of what Nori was talking about. From a forest manager's perspective, how do you accommodate these concerns in your management, and in terms of determining kind of what's possible, when you still have production targets, when you still have land management expectations from your property, how do you incorporate, what practices can you change, how quickly can that occur, those sorts of issues. We were just starting that conversation when we got pulled back, but I think that's going to be an important one for it, and certainly the case studies that we had from both Oceanside and from Ashland, I think, showed some paths for that. But I think we're just at the beginning of those processes.
Excellent, thank you. Aaron.
What stood out specifically with this group was the diversity of opinions that were offered from different stakeholders: Soil and Water Conservation District, DEQ, a municipal water utility. And so I think that, and also a natural resource and environment reporter. So I think that transparency and public trust founded upon that basis of communication goes a long way to extending dialogue without acrimony. I also think too that there, are salient results of this research and work that have been done. For instance, in the case of Ashland, it's a case study throughout the 2 days of this conference. Other communities look to Ashland as well, such as Medford. The biophysical environment isn't exactly the same, but certain principles, are gleaned from that case study example. And I think that the sharing between communities and also foresters in terms of best practices is really important. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Alicia.
So this kind of builds off of some of what Erin was saying, but our group really came back to the idea of how important transparency is between, water entities, forestry companies, landowners, and how in order to build and maintain those positive trusting relationships, you have to be able to be informed kind of about what's going on neighboring properties, especially if you are downstream to something and your operations, the way that you react to certain things might change depending on what is happening upstream. Having that open communication with these different entities is really important. And again, that kind of bounced into this topic really related to Ferns as well, and how currently that system kind of leaves something to be desired for folks. It doesn't really give as robust of information as a lot of subscribers might like to have. And so there might be some positive impact if there is a increased communication with that system. And I realized I just saw something in the comment, the Ferns acronym. So Ferns is the notification system that landowners will file a notification of operation through when they are alerting to any operation happening on their land. So having that be something that is easier for landowners to get specific information on can go a long ways in maintaining positive relationships.
Thank you so much. And the order of our last three facilitators will be Dean, Dan, and then Inka will be our closer.
Okay, and so one of the things our group noted was the wide array of people that were here, but also the wide array of people that were not at this meeting. And that kind of got us onto the challenge of public education on land management as well as water management, and that everybody involved needs to be more informed.
Thank you. Dan?
Yes, thank you. I was about to speak without unmuting. Gosh dang it. Okay, so I had mentioned this earlier too, but what really moved me was just how folks really picked up on just this, the complexity of all of these things and these systems, and just the interdependence, but with everything, including communities and all of that. And another big aha moment that this group seemed to have, and that I could relate to also, was just the percentage of private ownerships in some of these systems. And just that we're a little surprised by that. There were some other things that I thought were neat related to fire. The fire projection maps, one person commented that they were really great to see, but they were also kind of frightening, but really benefited from that. There was just some talk really just like I mentioned also, just these water quantity issues and water quality. So just I think there was a lot of really great discussion, and overall I just like to end up with people really felt that they got a lot of good information here. Some people expressed that it not necessarily was anything new, but it really did just emphasize just the importance of the things that they kind of already did know. And one person learned that they're working on some fire monitoring projects, and just wow, there's some other things that I need to consider when I'm doing that project. It was a really good group. Happy to be a part of it.
Thank you, Dan. And Inka.
Yeah, one of the kind of big takeaways I had was the conversation that our group had about there's just a real need to interpret the scientific data and present it in a way that the public can understand it. And, you know, obviously this affects all of us. We all want, you know, high quality, safe drinking water. And so I think it sounded like, you know, we talked about how, you know, it's important to, you know, interpret the data about, you know, flashpoints like salvage logging, for example, and help the public understand that, you know, it's complex. And then we happened to have someone who was from out of state, and he was wondering, you know, does the public know about the important connection between forest and drinking water, and how is that being communicated to them? And so we talked about that, and, you know, that's kind of an important thing to do to build that trust, especially if you're like a, you know, public land manager, for example, but also private landowners as well. So having that interface with them, so and helping them understand that important connection. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. Greatly appreciate you being able to facilitate the breakout rooms and be able to bring some of that knowledge and wisdom from your groups back to us. As our last, maybe the last parting shot, I will have John Souter say if he has any last word with this as he and Mike head into our final session. So thank you all so much.